Hello and welcome to Maya with Haste. George here again. In this video we're going to pick up where we left off talking about UVs, but I wanted to do something a little bit more interesting. We've been playing with primitive objects so far and they're interesting and simple to throw down. It's really not what you're going to be messing with in terms of UVs when you start creating your own models. So I thought we could go ahead and use an existing model that I'm currently working on for a project and see how I tackle it using projections as well as manipulating things inside the UV editor. So let's take a look at what I'm actually trying to do here. This is a photo of the ceiling, at least part of the ceiling. I've gone ahead and stenciled that area out. I've created the same mesh and I duplicate it several times. First is, of course, using the UV projections such as planar, really probably mostly planar in this video because all of our surfaces are very flat. But we'll talk about the different options inside of planar, and then we'll also go into the Windows UV editor. Now it looks like, unfortunately, I may have been working with two monitors in the past, and I lost that monitor, so now all of my settings are gone. So if this happens to you, make sure you watch my other video on how to reset different windows such as the UV editor by going into your preferences folder and modifying those preferences. I'm going to do that really quick. So looking at our reference material, the first thing we need to notice is that most of this is just going to be a flat paint color. One of the reasons I want to retain my UVs is I'm probably going to use some sort of ambient occlusion or baking in, not shadow information, but basically corners and edges where a darkening effect occurs due to the fact that less light can get into that area. That is, light bounces around in that area and gets trapped and never kind of comes out back into our eyes. So it's perceived as being darker. It's a light trap. Corners are really. And this is a really nice effect to cause different elements to sort of pop out, introduce some contrast between different areas. Now the windows on top are also pretty much very diffuse. They're not letting light in straight. Light is going in and scattering out all over the place. So I'll probably just use a simple texture for those areas as well. In addition, the back windows, while they do look outside to the sky, I might just fake it and put just a sky texture on them as well. Let's go ahead and open our ceiling back up. And yes, we have our UV editor now that I reset the location of it. Perfect. So here we are with our object. Now we're only going to work with one set, and then we're going to duplicate it over and over and over again across the entire object. I'm trying to remember, not that it really matters, but I think this is the one that I started with first. Now all these panels are the same except for this last one right here. I screwed up the dimensions slightly, so this one's a little bit wider than the rest of them. But it shouldn't really be a problem for us. It's in an area where that no one is going to even really expect to look. Now once I do the UVs on this section, I can of course duplicate it. Okay, so let's start with the easiest thing. We're going to do the back side of this object right here, and we'll notice it's just a series of different panels, sort of each one inset to the other one. This last one is a little bit off size, but if I wanted to, I could separate all these elements out and then copy and paste it after I do one, vastly reducing the amount of work that I have to do. And I think I am going to do that. So let's just go ahead and grab this center location, go to Window, UV Editor. You know what, let's just bring the UV editor up on the side here. Let's do a 2 view, close that really quick. Panels, Panel, UV Editor. There we are, nice. Now the first thing we're going to do is use the UV planar tool. We're going to open up the settings for this, and there are not that many. It's not so bad. The first one is best plane, so that's either going to use, when you have one face selected, the normal itself to determine which direction to come in at it from, or it's going to use, if you're using multiple faces at once, the average of all those normals. And remember, the normal is perpendicular to the surface. If we have this one face selected, the normal is going to be, well, straight on, right? So let's just hit apply, and what you'll notice here is that we have this orangey area. This is the surface of that. These are the UVs, the edges of the UVs. Now I had two parameters checked here. The insert projection before deformers thing is way advanced for us right now. Let's not get into that. But the second one, or the first one I should say, the keep image width and height ratio is important. If I check that off and hit apply, what happens is that the ratios of the sides are not kept. It is stretched to fill that entire 0 to 1 space. In some cases, that's what you want to do. In most cases, though, you usually want to keep that ratio. So I get rid of that and make sure that I keep that width to height ratio. So it really is that object. Why is this important? Well, because you're distorting it, right? You're mapping things not one-to-one anymore, but one to some variation. If you were to put a checkerboard on that surface, the checkers wouldn't be equal. Typically, what you'd like to do when you're dealing with things like this is I want to grab all of these faces really quick, and you'll notice this whole area becomes selected. Now, usually when I'm working with UVs, I want to grab all the ones that I'm not working with right now, all the junk as I call it, and just get it away from this 0 to 1 space. I want to keep that clean and pristine for all of my work. Now I need to do the rest of this. So if I can click here, right click, and hold the control button and do grow selection, so I can grow outwards from there. Now I have everything selected. So let's go ahead and do, instead of best plane, let's do best plane first of all. You see it does a fine job. Everything averages out so it comes straight on it. Well, we could have also done bounding box. Bounding box allows you to specify an axis. That is the X, Y, or Z axis, and that's the direction of attack the planar mapping options comes from. So if it's the X axis, I'm coming from the X direction, I'm hitting the surface. If I come from the Y axis, for instance, now I'm coming from the top down, right? And the only thing with thickness from the top is this bit right here, so that's why it becomes this narrow strip. If I do it from the Z axis as well, it comes from the sides. All of this large portion, the flat portions here that face the X direction, are lost. They're reduced down to a line, basically. So you're going to need to be careful with which one you select. Okay, so let's go ahead and just use X-axis for now, and you can see that pops everything out just fine. Now, if I want to, what I can try to do here is I can try to be a little sneaky. I could, for instance, scale this in slightly. And what's basically happening is, remember how I said this turns into a line, an infinitely thin line? Let's undo that. So right now, if I select this face, this red face over here is actually equivalent to this red line right there. There's no thickness to it. I still have all those connections though. So if I were to scale down the UVs over here, it's actually pulling those edges along one side smaller as well. I'm creating width now for that. Why is this good? Why is this important? Well, by doing that, I still have everything connected. When we take a look at another example, things are going to get broken up. When we use the planar mapping options, we can select individual faces and cut them up like we did at first with just the window. Many times when you're dealing with the texturing phase, which comes right after this one, you don't want to break things up. In fact, you want to keep the texture as unified as possible because it makes it easier for the artist when they're in the texturing application, whether that's Photoshop or GimShop or ZBrush, well, not so much ZBrush. ZBrush is a whole other beast. But it makes it easier for you to see how objects are connected, and it makes it easier for features to flow from one surface to the next. So this way, we keep everything connected. Imagine someone gave you a piece of paper and said, draw a picture. But then someone else gave you a piece of paper, but they went with scissors and cut it all up first. And they said, draw the same picture. Well, trying to get all those pieces together and then drawing a clean line from one piece to the next is not easy. So if we try to keep our UVs together as much as possible, it's impossible to do it perfectly, mind you, we'll have a nice image at the end of the day. So I'm actually going to use this feature now to grow out slowly from the center and then scale down. So each of these ridges, which right now are infinitely thin, get some placement in my image. So I only need to do this once more, and that's for that ridge right there. So let's right click, go to face mode. I'm going to do let's do grow selection. I'm going to do it once more. And now I should have enough to grab that edge right there. Let's go ahead and scale this one down. You can see magically that edge kind of appears. And that's it. We now have UVs, real coordinates, for all of that information of this object. Very simple, and that technique is a really nice one to keep in the back of your head. I think I'm just going to make this back panel. I could make it its own texture in the future. I'm not sure. We're going to leave it sort of big and large in the space for the moment. I'm going to duplicate everything off. So next up, we need to do the UVs for this section right here. So I'm probably going to have all of these objects sharing one texture. That means each one of these segments will end up being one draw call, which is really easy to work with and use. I'll probably, if I use ambient occlusion, I might just have a separate set of UVs just for that instead. Okay, so now let's go ahead and texture this window, which is a little bit more interesting looking. Now we can, of course, use the UV planar mode, and we can use best plane. And since they're all in the same plane, what you'll notice when I'm doing that is I get this nice grid layout of all the individual objects, all the different window panes. Now, I could just try to keep all this stuff together. I mean, the reality is no one's going to get up close to this surface and even see the texturing between these panels. And when you're texturing things, you do have to ask this question, who's going to see this? Is anyone going to notice if I do have a single pixel thin area for this. So if I right click and I grow my selection, do that twice, looks like. 1, 2, 3, there we are. Now I have this entire panel selected, and I can go ahead and do that best bounding box again, and you'll see it does a very, very good job. I can just pretty much leave it this way. I'm probably going to flip things though. I think this is upside down from my perspective. So if I come up here, you'll notice we have the ability to flip along the X and Y, the U or the V direction. I'm going to flip along the V direction, just bring that element back over here someplace. And then we also have all this other junk. This is the rest of the UVs in this model. Like I said before, I like to take these things and just move them off to the side.